Welcome. Thank you for joining us this year for ACU Summit 2020, and especially for joining us on this pathway that is known as a path to peace for Churches of Christ. As you can tell from the list of speakers for this particular pathway, we have some very successful and honorable people involved, as well as myself. You can see Dr. Foster and Dr. Crawford are part of this, as well as Kaylee Ife. But I'm the unknown. I am currently completing my MDiv through ACU, and that is how I became a part of this particular pathway. My name is Nate Reiser. I am a caretaker at Camp Nietes, and here you can see a picture of my family, my son Nick Reiser in the bottom left with his fiancee Macy, as well as my daughter Amy on the right. We're all attending Harding University, and so that leaves my wife and I, who are in the back of this picture, as empty nesters, and we're enjoying this stage of life and really looking forward to what God has in store for us. Now, some of you are on social media and perhaps have seen some of those pictures where it says, hey, if you live in this cabin for 6 months, we'll give you $10,000 or something along that line. This particular picture says, this is my dream home, a creek, a porch, woods to roam. Well, I am that guy. I am the guy who gets to live in a beautiful area in Missouri. I live on 225 acres of wooded land known as Camp Nietes. It is a Church of Christ camp about an hour south of St. Louis. It has a creek running right through the middle of it with 3 waterfalls, a big old cliff overlook that overlooks the state park. God has truly blessed me by giving me an opportunity to do ministry out in nature, and I love every minute of it. But God has not always been that nice to me. You see, I think that God likes to, the weird way to say it is he likes to mess with me. Probably a more biblical way is God likes to transform me. God has been transforming me for the last 25 years. When I completed college, I graduated from York College. And as you can see, we like to spread our finances among all the Church of Christ schools. There's York College. My MDiv will be from ACU. As you can see, my kids are going to Harding. But when I graduated from York, I had an education degree. And so I went to the classroom. And I started working in the classroom and enjoyed my time there. I spent 7 years as a social studies teacher. Currently at the camp, I also spend time at the school as a substitute. So I've spent over 17 years in the classroom. And one thing that I guess started getting to me was every day we would start off with a Pledge of Allegiance. And probably like most of you, we grew up with this idea that you stand every morning and you look at the flag, you place your hand over your heart, and you say the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. And the more I said it, and again, 17 years worth of saying that pledge, will make you stop and dissect it and start to think about it. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized there's something wrong here. I feel wrong actually saying this pledge. But that just seems countercultural because, well, as we know, we all grew up saying this pledge. So I started doing a little bit of research on the Pledge of Allegiance. And did you realize that the actual phrase, I pledge allegiance to the flag, did not come until 1920s? In fact, initially, when we would say the pledge, we would actually do the Bellamy salute. And if you don't know what that is, I have a picture here of many young people as they raise their arm, point the hand straight towards the flag. And for some reason in 1942, they felt, specifically Congress felt, that maybe we should change this to something else, probably due to the fascist countries in Europe that were doing similar type of approaches for their country. And so they changed this approach to placing the hand over the heart. And that is pretty much what most of us grew up with. So many of you also have issues with the Pledge of Allegiance. And you say, you know what, there is one part of the Pledge of Allegiance that we need to keep, and that is this phrase, one nation under God. Well, as I did my research, I realized or found out that did not come into existence until 1954. Before that, that phrase did not even exist in the pledge. And that is the thing that you struggle with. At least that's what I find mostly on social media. What I struggle with is the part that came in 1923, and that is that I pledge allegiance to a flag. You know, I have the same problem in church because I grew up in Churches of Christ, and we would sing a song called, that says that I cling to the old rugged cross. And I thought, I don't cling to the cross. I cling to Christ. I get it. Both are symbolic. The one is I'm clinging to Christ. The other one is I'm pledging myself to this country. But as Christians, I struggle with this idea that we are going to pledge ourselves to this country. It doesn't seem right. As I said, God likes to mess with me or transform me. And so about 16 years ago, I was a youth minister. I had left teaching after 7 years and started into youth ministry. God, I felt, was calling me to work in his church. And so I was truly blessed to work in St. Louis in one of the churches of Christ and be surrounded by several other youth ministers. And these youth ministers changed me. Our time together, we spent talking about theology and about all the things about life, and it was just great. Ministry was fun because I had these guys to be comrades, to be partners in ministry with. I still have a great relationship with them, men like Steve Autry and Jerry Williamson, Jeremy Picker, Mike Brown, big names in youth ministry around St. Louis. But one of the books I remember we talked about a lot was one that came out by Shane Claiborne. It was called Irresistible Revolution. And Claiborne was kind of, fighting against some of this nationalism problem that existed. And he had the same kind of struggles that I do now. One of the things he talked about in Irresistible Revolution was this idea that, if we all just grew our own food and made our own clothes, we could create a community that looked a lot like the first century church. Now, it was a neat idea, but honestly, it was youth ministers talking about it. And if you give us about 3 days, we're going to forget about it and move on to something else. We all have 80s. It's kind of the world that youth ministers seem to live in. My apologies to those of you that don't have that issue. Anyway, it wasn't so much his first book that it really caught my attention. It was his second book. And surprisingly enough, nobody else was really talking about this second book. But the second one was called Jesus for President. And it was in this one that I really felt God was changing me. You see, Claiborne jumped right into this idea about pacifism and that we are people of peace as Christians, that God has called us to be something different, something unique, and that war is not where we belong. And that took me into my graduate work. During my graduate work, I had an opportunity in Dr. Crawford's class to write a paper about pacifism. And I loved the study, but through that study, I also found that there were other elements that came about. And one of those elements was this idea of nationalism, that we have gotten so encapsulated by our country. We have become patriots, strong patriots, ones that care about our country so much. We're passionate about it. You get on social media, you're definitely going to see that we're passionate about our country, about who the next president should be, about who we should vote for, about the fact that you definitely should vote. And I thought, is that really what we should be about? Well, Claiborne's book, Jesus for President, was wonderful because he not only talked about pacifism, he also talked about this issue. And he spoke about the early church and the fact that Christians would not make sacrifices to gods during the Roman Empire. We're talking about the first century church, this first church that existed. You see, Rome was one of those countries that was a lot like America. It was renowned. It was well known. It was the great empire. And the thing about Rome was they allowed all of these new empires that they took over to keep their gods. So there were multitudes of gods throughout the Roman Empire. So Rome had no problem with Yahweh. They had no problem with the Christians worshiping Yahweh. They thought we were a little odd because, well, first of all, they thought we were cannibals because we ate the body and drank the blood during communion. They thought we were weird because we would be married to our wife, but then eventually we would be called sister and brother to each other. And so is that incest? There was just a few things that they did not understand within the Christian religion. But the Christians did not just simply accept everything about Rome. When they became Roman citizens, they said, okay, that's fine. We will honor Rome. We will obey all of the laws of the land, but there's some issues that we still have. And one of those issues was making sacrifices. They couldn't make sacrifices to other gods. Now, the Roman people were superstitious. And if you didn't make a sacrifice to the correct God, then calamity would come to your area. And so when calamity occurred, when natural disasters happened, who did they turn to? Well, they turned to the group that wouldn't make the sacrifice, the Christians. And that was where the problem lied. But the Christians didn't just simply refuse to make sacrifices to other gods. They also refused to make sacrifices to Caesar. Now, this was a problem because they're not truly acknowledging the empire of Rome, because they would not accept Caesar as one of their gods. The Christians said, were not going to be a part of that. And they were outside of the empire in some ways. They were separate from all of this patriotism for Rome. A couple of early writers, some of the early church fathers, had things to say about this. Tertullian says that we are charged with being irreligious people in respect to the emperors, since we refuse to pay religious homage to their imperial majesties. We do not celebrate the festivals of the Caesars. Athenagoras says something similar. They said that they charge us on 2 points, that we do not sacrifice and we do not believe in the same gods as the Senate. And so you can see that even some of these early church fathers recognized that the Christian community was different. They were separate, they were unique, and they were okay with it for one main reason. They served a different king. You see, I think that's the important part that we need to remember through this, that Jesus is my king. So we already have a king. How can we then have an emperor? That's at least what they said at that time. Today, let's take the same stance. We already have a king. How can we have a president? Which one are we going to follow? You see, the problem for them is they recognize that you cannot serve 2 masters. Now, I realize that Jesus, when he was talking about or made that statement, he specifically connects it to money. But I think the connection can be the same when you're talking about government, because we are divided people. Part of us is willing to say, yes, I'm a Christian and I'm proud of it, but I'm also American and I'm proud of it. Well, which one are you more proud of? If I were to get on your social media, which one would have more time to it? Which one would have more press? If I were to go and join your conversation, which one would you speak about more? Your king or your president? Now, the early church understood that we are not citizens. Another great phrase that comes from Philippians. We are not citizens of this world. Our citizenship is in heaven. What a great line from the Bible. Thank you, from the book of Philippians. Also in John, it says that Jesus says that my kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would have been fighting. Again, here's your connection to peace. They would be fighting that I might not be delivered over to the Jews, but my kingdom is not from this world. When we accept Christ and we declare that we are Christians and we are disciples of him, we are going to follow him. That example then is set for us. And what is it that we're going to follow? Well, part of it is we're going to be people of peace, but the other part is that we have our king. We have selected our leader. Well, it wasn't just the early church that had things to say about it. Thankfully, the Restoration movement, some of the early guys had things to say as well. Tolbert Fanning was one of the first that I really found that had a lot to say about politics and voting. He believed that we should not be involved in politics. We should not vote. And he connected it to peace as well. He said that if we vote, we could elect somebody who sends us into war. And that is also what we're not a part of. And so our voting can also play a part in what happens to us. In fact, he gives this phrase, and I think it's kind of apparent that you can see that there is a separation of country and God for the early people in the Restoration Church, at least for Fanning and especially for Lipscomb, where we're going to go to next. He says this: the church was designed to swallow all civil government. So we're going to swallow up all civil government by leavening the earth and bringing all powers of the world into subordination. So not only are we just not going to be a part of politics, we're going to actually take them over. That is a pretty bold statement. I think if you said that today, you might have the FBI knocking on your door. There might be a few issues that you face. See, for Fanning, he says that the Christian's grand purpose is to promote the King of Zion. We are about a spiritual empire. We are not about a physical one. Well, we know that Tolbert Fanning had a very big influence on David Lipscomb, and Lipscomb is going to write a pretty extensive work on his thoughts about civil government. Lipscomb says that his goal, again, sounds very similar, is for the kingdom of heaven to destroy all earthly kingdoms and dominions, to destroy all earthly kingdoms and dominions. And I'll show you soon how he looks at making that possible. Ultimately, what Lipscomb gets to is this: all human governments are corrupt. They're evil. They were created by men. So if they're created by men, then Christians should not be a part of them, because we are all about God. We are all about Jesus as the King. As I said, Lipscomb wrote a work called Civil Government, Its Origins, Missions, and Destiny. And here's what he says: every human government uses the substance, the time, the service of the subjects to enrich, gratify the appetites and lusts, and to promote the grandeur and glory of the rulers. When I read this, I think a lot about 1 Samuel chapter 8, when Israel originally goes to ask for a king. And God says, okay, you guys can have a king, but let me warn you, there's going to be a problem. And here's what it's going to be. That king is going to take your sons to drive his chariots. He's going to take your sons to work the fields. He's going to take your daughters to serve him in whatever way is necessary. He's going to take the best of your fields. He's going to take a tenth of your grain and your flocks. And Israel said, that's okay. We want a king. I think at this point right here, and this is where Lipscomb, I think, gets to as well, he said, this is the point when humanity said, we are tired of letting God be our king. We want one that's earthly, that's physical, that we can touch, that we can hear, that we can speak to, that we can recognize, we can make posters of, we can get behind, if we will. I think at this point, God was hurt a little bit. Because up until this point, he was their ruler. He was their king. And they said, no, we want something else. One more phrase from Lipscomb, I think it's very, very good. It is the duty of the Christian to submit to the human government. I know some of you are thinking right about now, what is this guy talking about? You want me to stop all of this stuff about government? Well, here you go again, back to Lipscomb. Submit to human government. Yes, we are to submit. We're going to submit to it in its office and work and to seek its destruction by spreading the religion of Christ and so converting men from service to an earthly government to service to a heavenly one. And so too by removing the necessity for its existence and work. There comes a point then where there would be no need for earthly governments. Why? We would be a big Christian community. Lipscomb understood the book of Acts, and he read it well, and in it, he saw the model of what it could look like. That was what Claiborne was also writing about, this idea that the first church, as it came into existence, and they were close-knit, and they were united in all things, taking care of each other as they had need, that was what the vision was supposed to be. And Lipscomb recognized it. He goes on to say, no violence, no sword, no bitterness or wrath can he use. The Christian cannot use those things. The spread of the peaceful principles of the Savior will draw men out of the kingdoms of earth into the kingdom of God. These are two different things. The kingdom of God and the kingdom of earth. They are not the same. So let me ask, what happened? You can see the early fathers saying these things. You can see some of the early Restoration fathers saying these things. Well, what happened? How did we lose our way? Well, I'm going to make the claim that it came during World War I and World War II. You see, around 1918, Congress passed a law, and it was called the Sedition Act of 1918. Prior to this, they had other sedition acts that existed. That's why it has the title of 1918. But the previous ones were not as strong as this one. See, in 1918, we were in the middle of going into conflict with World War I with Germany. And so what Congress passed, in essence, was a complete demand that we follow the government. Any speeches or articles of opinion that cast the government or the war effort in a negative light are now punishable by imprisonment. So, if I were to make this speech in 1919, I would be imprisoned. I am speaking against the government. Well, as we know about the Restoration churches, a large part of our theology or our stances on topics has to come through our publications. And so this one hurt, and it hurt very badly because the Gospel Advocate in 1918 was censored until the end of World War I. That means there are no more topics or no more articles about pacifism, which is what they were writing about. There was no more articles about being free of the government and separating from the government. They weren't allowed. Congress stepped in and actually stopped us from being who we were. That's crazy to me to think about, because I now live in the year 2020 where I am free to write what I want. I am free to express myself how I want. I can't imagine a world where they said, no more of that. But this is America. Don't we have freedom of speech? Except during times of war. The government did the second thing, which is, they're smart. Advertising, marketing. They realized that a great way to convert the country over to what they wanted was to advertise it. And they used some great advertisings. their marketing says, wake up, America, there is an evil out there, and that evil is Germany. And we are not the evil, they are. And you need to all help us. Maybe you won't go fight, but you can buy Liberty bonds. You can all fight now, or else you're going to be imprisoned by this evil Germany. And one thing major came out of this whole thing, and that is the United States started to get painted as a Christian nation. Now, we can have the argument for a very long time about if we are or are not a Christian nation. That does not matter to me. I'm concerned about if you are a Christian or not a Christian. I'm not concerned about the nation. But this was a very, very smart move on the government's part because they painted us as this Christian nation, which means they knew they were getting all the Christians to back them up then. At this point right here, when we become the Christian nation, that means everybody that we fight against is not a Christian nation. They are the enemy. They are then from the devil. And you can see the image that I have that kind of paint Germany as the devil. Now, I'm not saying that Germany was completely free of evil, but can I say the same thing about America? Probably. This is getting very, very difficult as we go through time because there's going to come a point when we do the same thing during the Gulf War. But at what point do we, as America, come in combat with another Christian nation? Let's go back in time. Would we say the same thing about the Civil War? Okay, which one was the Christian nation? Which one was not? Revolutionary War, you're going against England. Are they the Christian? No, there's a problem. But the government sold us on this. During World War I, World War II, they really turned our tide. And here's what came out of it. 3 main ideas. First of all, God has chosen and blessed America. This idea that we are a Christian nation and God is on our side. The second thing, those that oppose America are opposing God. And the third one, and this is the one that we really exist in now, that patriotism is an acceptable religion. Again, patriotism is an acceptable religion. And I think that's important to recognize because it is a religion. We have been sold a bill of goods and we have bought in completely. Well, the problem is, on December 7th, several years later, the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. I know that date well because I was a youth minister at a church and I had just finished a rousing sermon, did such a great job. I really moved all the people to the local restaurant. Again, I'm a youth minister, not a preacher. And I finished and I walked into the foyer where the offices were, and there was a group of men, all about 70, 80 years old. And I walked in there and I thought, oh, wow, okay, done preaching. This is not really the thing I enjoy doing the most, but I think I did an all right job. And the very first thing one of the men asked me is said, hey, do you know what day it is today? And I said, Sunday? And he said, yeah, it's Sunday. But you know it's December 7th? And I said, okay. He said, yeah, it's December 7th, Pearl Harbor Day, and you never mentioned it once. I was stunned. I'm sorry, I went in and did a sermon about God in church, and I forgot the most important thing to remember. It was Pearl Harbor Day. Like I said, God likes to mess with me. I think that day was important in my development because I realized, yeah, there's something wrong here. There's something wrong with us. And it comes down to this. I think it's really 2 issues. First of all, the thing about freedom is it gives us power. And we like that power. You see, in this country, we get freedom of speech, and we like to use it. That's power. Our opinion matters. Our voice matters. We like to tell people what we think. And it's a power play. And as we know, the Bible is full of statements about how we need to resist this power. And so I'm asking you today to step back and consider this. Are you grasping this power and taking it in a bad direction? As I look on social media, I've found statements that kind of point to this fact. One of them says this: some of y'all are too busy being Republican or Democrat to notice you stopped being decent a long time ago. Very true. Second one, your Christianity must keep your politics in check. When your politics start keeping your Christianity in check, something's gone out of order. And I think that's what's happened. we have things out of order. Some of you are not going to be at the same place I am. As I said, God has been transforming me for some time, and this might be your first taste of this transformation. But I hope through this talk right here, you begin to question some things and step back and analyze yourself. And I want to ask about this power part of it. How much of your time and your energy and your conversation is about the kingdom of Christ, and how much of it is about the kingdom of men? Has your politics kept your Christianity in check, or vice versa? It is about power. Well, this is a conference about peace. Well, let me tell you this right now. I am a pacifist. It has taken me some time to get here. I am also not going to be voting in 2020. You can cast me in whatever light you like. I'm okay with it. But I can tell you right now, it is freeing. I have so much peace because when the commercial comes on about the next candidate, I go, that's nice. Okay. And this goes for local, it goes for national. I'm not voting. I'm done with the rat race. I'm done with the chase. It doesn't matter to me. There is so much peace inside of me because none of that matters anymore. And you know the third part to it is that I become hyper-focused. I have learned that if I shut that part off, now I have more energy and time to dedicate towards something else. And I think that's what these early writers were realizing. That if we are so focused on the kingdom of Christ, there's no time to get distracted by the kingdom of men, at least in the sense of politics. There is a lot of peace to it. A couple of, or at least one more little statement here for you. Christian, if you feel politically homeless, you're probably right where God wants you. This world is not your home. We serve a greater ruler, and we're to represent his kingdom here. And it looks nothing, not a bit like our present political power structures and parties. We are politically homeless. That's me. I want you to join me, but I understand it is a difficult journey, and I hope that this was one simple part in the process for you, that you will find the peace that I have, because I understand, like those early leaders, that I have one king, and Jesus is my king.